Okay, so this is part two of the Great Gatsby chapters 5 and 6 notes. Again, remember, you are responsible for these notes for any tests or quizzes, so you need to be copying these down. Okay, so for Daisy, one of the most significant aspects of Daisy and her character is just how shallow she is. And you really see this when she goes over to Gatsby's home for the first time. Now, there's a scene in this section where Gatsby, upon showing his mansion to Daisy, he's looking for approval from her. Everything that's in this mansion has been furnished there, placed there for Daisy's approval. And at one point, Gatsby starts throwing some of his very expensive shirts out for Daisy to see. And Daisy cries upon seeing these shirts. And she says that it makes her sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before. And I want to stress that her tears are not about the shirts. It's about what the shirts represent. The shirts represent Gatsby's wealth. There is an aspect of regret here that Daisy is feeling. 5 years prior, when Daisy and Gatsby were together, Daisy's family did not approve of this relationship. And this relationship was pretty short, by the way. She has a certain lifestyle that she was born into, and her parents expected that to continue for the rest of her life. They felt Gatsby was not of that same social class. He was not old money. So when he left to go off to war, Daisy moved on very quickly, and she married Tom. Tom had the lifestyle that Daisy was accustomed to. Tom was old money. Gatsby was not. Did she marry Tom for love? That's something that's going to come up a little bit later in the book. But for right now, we can definitely know that Daisy did love Gatsby at one point. I mean, the day before she married Tom, she was crying, saying she didn't want to marry Tom, and clutching a letter that Gatsby had written her. So for her now to be crying over the shirts, there's regret there because she is thinking she could have married Gatsby. If she had waited, she could have married Gatsby for love and money. She could have still had her same lifestyle and been in love with the man she married if she had just waited. So when it talks about these shirts, it's not about the shirts. It's about what they represent. It's Gatsby's wealth, and she is regretting not waiting for him because she could have had it all at this point. Now, with Gatsby and Daisy reuniting, they resume their affair. And Gatsby has been throwing these parties all summer long. And finally, for the first time, Daisy actually is able to attend one of them. And she brings her husband with her, which is a little awkward. But she does come to this party. And with very few exceptions, and that really is during the time that she spends with Gatsby, Daisy is miserable at this party, because she cannot relate to the people who are there. She is an old money person. The vast majority of the people who attend these parties are new money people. They are different social groups. She has very little in common, if anything in common, with these people. So she's miserable. That is not a good sign for the longevity of Gatsby and Daisy's relationship, because there has to be commonality there. There has to be something that bonds the two of you. And if you come from two totally different worlds, that's not something that's going to be sustainable. And for Daisy, and the fact that she's miserable does give you a hint. It does foreshadow that Daisy's probably never going to fit into Gatsby's life. Now, there is one thing that does interest her at this party, and that is when she was watching an actress take directions from the director that was attending the party. Daisy makes a comment that this woman is very lovely. It's not surprising because an actress takes direction from a director. They play a role. Might be completely different than who they truly are, but they play it convincingly. And for Daisy, that very much is how she lives her life. she always takes direction from other people in her life, whether it be her parents from 5 years ago or whether it now is her husband. So she plays a role. She is acting throughout her life. She's playing the role of a happy, wealthy woman. She definitely is wealthy. Happy is debatable. So it's not surprising that she would have a connection to this actress because symbolically, they are very similar in the fact that they play roles. All right, so Tom Buchanan is also at this party, and that makes for a very awkward time. In fact, at one point, it talks about Tom's presence gave the evening its peculiar quality of oppressiveness. He makes himself known when he is anywhere. Now, notice the difference in how he is treated by Gatsby at this party versus how Tom treats Wilson at his garage. Remember, Gatsby is having an affair with Tom's wife. Tom is having an affair with George Wilson's wife. The men treat the other men totally in the opposite way. Gatsby is respectful to a certain extent. Tom is not. Tom is oppressive in every aspect of everyone he interacts with. So there's a definite difference between how these men treat those they come in contact with. At one point during this party, Tom is very bored. He's sitting at a table with his wife and decides, I've had enough, gets up, goes to another table and starts pursuing another woman right under his wife's nose. So again, very much a lack of respect that Tom exhibits towards other people. And finally, the last thing for Tom that's significant in this section is he starts to become more aware of his wife's interest in Gatsby. And he wants to know who Gatsby is, just like everybody else has throughout this entire book. And at one point he says, I'd like to know who he is and what he does, and I think I'll make a point of finding out. For Tom, the resources that he has, the money that he has, the connections that he has, this is something he's going to be able to do. This will foreshadow the next chapter that we're going to be reading, chapter 7. You're going to see what he finds out. And all of this information that he gives, this is not something that his wife is aware of. Remember, Daisy, upon meeting Gatsby, knew him as Jay Gatsby, has no idea who he truly is, no idea of his background, no idea how he's made his money, for that matter, either. So you'll see what Tom finds out, if he finds out anything, in the next chapter. All right, and the last character that's of significance is in this section is Dan Cody. Now, Dan Cody actually is only in the book through flashbacks. He is someone who was in Gatsby's life when Gatsby was actually a teenager. At the time, Gatsby was about 17. Dan Cody was 50 years old. He was a legitimate self-made millionaire. He made his money in the gold rush. And Gatsby came on as a personal assistant to Dan Cody when he actually rescued Dan Cody from crashing his boat against the rocks when he was sailing. Becoming his personal assistant, I guess that's the best way you can describe it. He traveled around the world 3 times with him, spent 5 years with him, really learned what it was like to have money. So even like the phrases, like the old sport phrase that Gatsby uses, that actually came from Dan Cody. Dan Cody is the one who really was Gatsby's mentor. This is who lit the American dream ideal in Gatsby. Gatsby wanted to be a wealthy person. He created that identity upon meeting Dan Cody, but everything that went along with that was cultivated in his time with Dan Cody. Now, the arrangement lasted for 5 years. It did end rather suddenly when it says on page 100 that Dan Cody's mistress, Ella Kay, came aboard their boat one night in Boston, and a week later, Dan Cody inhospitably died. You could interpret that to mean that she possibly had killed him or done something to speed up his death. He was an alcoholic, so he probably had some issues to begin with. But that arrangement that Gatsby had just abruptly ended. Now, within Cody's will, he actually was to inherit $25,000 from him. However, Ella Kay never allowed him to inherit the money that was rightfully his. That money she kept from him through legal devices. She had inherited the rest of his wealth, which was millions. So she used probably every legal trick imaginable to keep the $25,000 from Gatsby. Now, that money, $25,000, does not seem like a lot of money, but if you adjust that for the time period that he would have inherited it to now, that is roughly $800,000 adjusted for inflation. That is a significant portion. $25,000 would have given Gatsby a legitimate start at a life for himself and for business or whatever. It would have been technically inherited money. So he actually technically could have fit the definition of old money, but she kept that money from him. And that was really his first taste of the brutal world that people live in and where greed becomes an overwhelming factor. So the money he should have gotten, rightfully was his, left in the will to him, was not given to him. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a significant portion of money that would have given him a head start in life and would have helped him achieve the dream he wanted, which was to have a better life than what he had been born into. Technically, by inheriting this, he could have fit the definition of old money, but he was never allowed to inherit the money. So he ended up then a few years later meeting Daisy, presenting himself as something he really was not, and then it spiraled out of control from there. But this relationship that he had with Dan Cody, it was very significant for him, and it could have changed his life trajectory quite significantly. Unfortunately, he was not allowed to inherit the money that he had been left.